We're all redcoats. You don't see any redcoats over there. Why not? Those people are Americans too. They are people who lived in the North American colonies. They did not think we should fight for independence, and so they formed regiments and volunteered to fight alongside the redcoats. And so you'll see some of them in green coats that they were issued by the British government to look soldierly, and like the redcoats are the British regulars. They are the professional soldiers. The 42nd Regiment, or the Black Watch, arrayed against the traditional side. Some of the militia first do not have uniforms. They're just wearing their own clothing. Then we've got several armed soldiers. They're making a charge at one end to try and collapse down the congressional line. Because what they can do here is now force the forces of Continental Congress to clump together and fight kind of back to back with themselves, or to cut off one end of the line and capture those troops and make them ineffective. And you can see now there's a withdrawal from the far end of the congressional forces pulling around on the one end, making kind of an L-shaped formation almost to box in the congressional forces. Here's the drummer out there. He's beating the prime and load. That's how commands were given on the battlefield. The drummers and fifers were the message senders of the armies during this war. Because you can see, I mean, we have, maybe 100, 200 people out here. You can think if there were 5,000 on either side, you could not hear the commands, voice commands, any more than a couple people away. So the drums actually were the people who kept things organized out there on the field by relaying the commands given by the officers and NCOs. So we're starting to see, as they get closer together, we see more casualties. Remember, muskets are really deadly at about 50 yards. You get to 100 yards, not so much. So, and now we see the effect of that flank attack here. The British Rangers, the Loyalists coming along the side. But now we see those militia now have gone all the way around the back and now they're on the far side of the field. So they're actually trying to now close in and do a flank attack on the British from the opposite side of the field. And there are actually several smaller skirmishes going on because the people on the various regiments on each side have kind of lost contact with each other. And that's one of the difficult things for a commander in a situation like this is you can't communicate and you can't have a concerted action if you have all of your units are split up into little clumps. It makes them vulnerable to being cut off or captured or rendered out of the action because the action has moved on someplace else. There are some women out on the battlefield. Women did travel with the armies during the American Revolution. On the British side, I know they were required to serve in the field hospitals as, well, they called it nursing. It was more just cleaning up messes, I think. But in order to get their food or their rations, they had to be married to the men. You would not probably have seen them on the battlefield except for a few instances where we know women were working on artillery crews. However, we use our women just as, frankly, 21st century first aiders out there. I mean, it was 46 degrees as a high at home up in Milwaukee, Chicago area the other day. So this seems pretty hot to us. So we just have some women out there carrying extra water and checking to make sure nobody's more than representing what they would actually do. And you've seen, even though with the turnaround on the battlefield, the British are not so much outnumbered as they just managed to get outmaneuvered and got themselves in a jam that they couldn't get out of. And they couldn't bring their firepower to bear on those various groups of congressionals out there. And so it looks like they are retreating to regroup and fight another day rather than die to the last man for an objective that was not necessarily all that important at this point in time. And so because they are withdrawing, and I would predict there'll be another a rematch at about 4 o'clock this afternoon or so to see if the British, as the representatives of the strongest empire in the world, can show better account of themselves. Forces are on the march and have managed an ambush here. And it looked like they were going to take a break there. A break at this point, but now you can see the British troops, more of them are kind of coming out from the gap in the tree line in the back. And you'll see things seem like they're a little slow to start. But when you're using these muzzle-loading weapons, and a musket is really deadly at 50 yards. You know, you'll hit something at 100 yards, maybe not exactly what you aimed at, but, you know, and beyond that, it's pretty useless. So, and especially since we don't want to have our people out there taking casualties the first minute in the battle, then it's all over. How boring. So knocking enough people down. There were rifles on both sides during the Revolution, but it takes much longer to load a rifle than it does a musket. Particularly afraid of the redcoats. So it looks like these are all experienced soldiers. The numbers are pretty close. Whoa! I think something went wrong with the artillery piece there, because the Crown forces felt perfectly comfortable jumping that fence and going right into the artillery piece. So I think they must have been able to see that the piece was unloaded, or there was a problem. They couldn't get it loaded properly, and they bypassed it entirely. Now you can see the small force of British is pushing in against the end of the congressional line. So they've mounted what we call a flank attack, and now the congressional forces they're formed in kind of an L formation, and then there's this other group that's kind of going this way. They've got enemies, you know, on 3 sides. So the soldiers, the officer is trying to get them to kind of form up in a square there, so that they can get some firepower to bear. You'll see that from our way of thinking, there are surprisingly few casualties while they're rearranging themselves in the field. In part, that is because they're not directly facing, you know, if they're not directly facing the enemy troops as they're moving around, it's just they're less likely to be hit by fire from one of those muskets. You'll see that the British are pressing their advantage. They see that they managed to, even though these are well-trained troops, they managed to kind of rattle and disorganize the congressional forces, and they're having to continually move around on the field to try and respond to what this British force is doing down here, using some light infantry tactics to move in a little more quickly. And so they're continuing to press that advantage. You see the 42nd, the Scottish soldiers coming across the field with fixed bayonets. If you've never been in front of a bunch of big guys like that coming at you with the bayonet fixed, you do not know what you were missing. You know, that is a scary sight, and the British are known for taking as many casualties with their bayonets as they ever did shooting people with muskets. So, and what is in danger of happening here is that the battle has the possibility of disintegrating into several smaller conflicts across the field, and then you risk having the commander just recognize that, because he pulled these troops back. If you get a few people separated from the rest, then you risk having them capture centers of the armies during the 18th century. And you'll see now that they're getting closer together, more casualties. But you also see what's happening is that now there's like congressional soldiers in the back of the British soldiers and in front of them and all over the place. And, you know, I'm not sure to predict what's going to happen here. A group of the 42nd, the Scottish Redcoats, are like, you know, chasing one of the color bearers and some of the troops off the field. And now we just have this little clump of congressional soldiers because the rest have left the field or are down. So they're moving fast in that direction. It looks like the British are probably inclined to let them go. There's a kind of a rear guard there. If they were to surrender, or the British were to capture them, then they're obligated to house and feed them. Out here in the frontier, they might not have a good enough supply line to want to do that. So they might just get them off the field, get them disorganized, get them gone, and let that be rather than force them to surrender or try and capture them. And I'm predicting that's what's going to happen here. We'll have to see, you know, what orders their commander gives. Now you'll see a lot of people down on the field. Most of those are not actually killed outright during battle. Most of them got back to the field hospitals. The problem was with no antibiotics and surgeons who did not know that they need to sterilize instruments in between patients. Your ability to survive being shot was based a lot more on your immune system and how well you could fight off the infection you were definitely going to get than just about anything else. So the people that you see down on the field, the casualties, will be taken care of by the surgeons on the victorious side, and then they will be kept as prisoners of war. And they're periodically during the conflict, there were some prisoner exchanges where, you know, they were able to exchange and get out of the prison camps and back to their own sides. You'll see some women out on the field. Actually, women did go with the armies of the 18th century. You would not see them very often in a combat situation like this. We very frankly use our women as 21st century first aiders. They've got extra water out there and they check the casualties to make sure that everybody is a pretend casualty and nobody's in trouble from being ill or having hurt themselves or having heat exhaustion or something, which it's not that. It's a beautiful day, but it's I'm up from the Chicago area and we had like 48 as a high the other day on Wednesday, and I was wishing for my winter coat. So by comparison, this feels like a huge heat wave, even though it's a lovely, lovely day. There we go. I can hear troops out on the field singing "God Save the King." So that's our clue that all of the congressional troops have left the field, and that the Crown forces, the forces of King George III, have won our battle this afternoon. So that does conclude our battle demonstration.
The Redcoats won.
Thank you.
That's still the way they do colors in Great Britain today. So,
ranks close to the front.
Now, do a parade. The parade will be led out by the red-coated troops down at the end. They're the escort.
So farewell, you sweethearts, you smiling girls adieu. And when the war is over, we'll kiss it out with you. No foreign slave shall give us love, no